What if the single most destructive event of the 20th century just never happened? Today, we're going to explore how a world without World War I wouldn't just be different, it might have actually led to something even worse.
It's such a simple question, right? But the answers are incredibly complex. You see, taking the Great War out of the equation doesn't just prevent one conflict, it completely rewrites the entire 20th century. To get why, we first have to understand just how huge its impact really was.
Historians have a name for it, the catastrophe, the primordial catastrophe. And that's the perfect way to put it. Think of it like the Big Bang of our modern age. It's the foundational disaster that set everything else in motion. The Russian Revolution, the rise of fascism, World War II, the Cold War, pretty much everything that defined the century. So what happens when you just take that away?
Well, you basically get two main theories. On one hand, there's the utopia-preserved idea. This is a world that just kept on with its pre-war economic boom, where old empires might have slowly reformed and all that horrific loss of life was avoided. But there's a much darker possibility: disaster delayed. A world where all the toxic stuff, like nationalism and colonialism, just kept festering, leading to an even worse conflict down the road, maybe even a nuclear one. So let's start by digging into the world that was lost, a world that was both full of promise and already teetering on the brink.
First, we've got to understand the world as it was, right before 1914. Because it wasn't just some peaceful era waiting for a war to start. It was an incredibly dynamic and deeply, deeply contradictory period of history.
I mean, this was an era of incredible progress. The world economy was absolutely humming, global trade was at an all-time high, and new technology was creating this brand new mass consumer culture. Things we just take for granted now, like department stores, professional sports, even just having a weekend off, that was all new stuff. To a lot of people, it really must have felt like the dawn of a truly modern age.
And you can see this huge shift in global power with just one key metric: steel. I mean, look at this. By 1913, the German Empire wasn't just catching up to Great Britain, who'd been the industrial leader forever. No, it was outproducing them by nearly 3 times. That's not just an economic shift. That's an earthquake rumbling right underneath the old world order.
And all this industry created absolutely staggering wealth. You just have to listen to this quote from a British prime minister describing a banker's mansion in Berlin. It paints this picture of insane opulence that was rivaling the old royal families. A whole new class of industrial titans was emerging, and they were dripping in marble and gold.
But, okay, that's only half the story. That's the shiny, gilded part. Underneath all that gold, life for the vast majority of people was, well, it was anything but glamorous. Social inequality was off the charts. Workers were facing brutal conditions, and all this tension was fueling radical politics, strikes, and protests. This glittering world was also a powder keg of social anger, just waiting to blow.
And where did all the money for that marble and gold come from? Well, for many European powers, it was being extracted from these massive colonial empires that were built on a foundation of just shocking brutality.
I mean, this quote from Cecil Rhodes is just brutally honest. He's basically saying that imperialism wasn't just about prestige. For some, it was a cold calculation to avoid a revolution back home. By grabbing new lands, you could get rid of your surplus population, create new markets, and basically point all that domestic anger outwards.
And how did they justify all of this? With a really toxic ideology. You had this idea called ethno-nationalism, which was then mixed with a completely twisted interpretation of Darwin's theories, something called social Darwinism. It created this pseudo-scientific belief in a struggle for survival between races. It was a fake science excuse to classify entire groups of people as inferior and to justify ruling over them.
And the results were horrifying. Just take the Congo Free State. It was basically the personal colony of Belgium's King Leopold II. The quest there for rubber and ivory led to a regime of forced labor and pure terror that killed an estimated 10 million people. That wasn't an accident. It was a system.
Behind a staggering number like 10 million are individual human stories of unimaginable horror. This is the testimony of a Congolese woman named Ilonga. The casual cruelty, the complete destruction of a family, this was the price of empire. So when we imagine a world without World War I, we also have to imagine a world where this system could have just kept going, completely unchecked, for a lot longer.
Okay, so let's do it. What would a world that was free from the Great War, but still plagued by all these deep problems, have actually looked like? Let's try to trace that alternate timeline.
So, first off, the great empires survive. The German Kaiser, the Russian Tsar, the emperors of Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. These guys would have held onto power for decades longer, and as a result, independence for colonies in Africa and Asia would be seriously delayed. And think about the Middle East. Without the Ottoman Empire collapsing, the political map would be unrecognizable. For example, it's very likely the State of Israel would never have been formed.
The global balance of power would also be completely different. The United States, which really became a world power by bankrolling the Allies, would probably have stayed a regional power for much, much longer. Britain, not ruined by war debt, would continue as the world's dominant economic force, with London, not New York, as the planet's financial center. And Russia? Well, no Great War means no Bolshevik Revolution, but the country was still a hotbed of unrest, so its future would have been one giant question mark.
Socially, this world might have been way more conservative. The massive upheaval of the war actually accelerated a lot of social changes, including women getting the right to vote. Without it, progress on women's rights and racial equality would have been much slower. And maybe the most disturbing part, the horrific slaughter of the war helped to finally discredit dangerous ideas like eugenics and that extreme, rabid nationalism. Without that terrible lesson, those ideologies would have just stayed mainstream.
And that brings us to the final, and frankly the most chilling twist in this whole alternate history. What if avoiding World War I didn't actually prevent a catastrophe at all, but merely set the stage for an even greater one?
This leads us to a really crucial point, and it's captured perfectly here by a Reddit user. What if the timing of World War I was, in a horrific way, a blessing? It taught the world a devastating lesson about industrial warfare just before the invention of the ultimate weapon. What happens if that lesson is never learned?
Because make no mistake, the bomb was coming. This timeline shows that the key scientific discoveries were happening no matter what was going on in the world. From the discovery of X-rays in 1895 to the splitting of the atom in Germany in 1938, the path to the atomic bomb was being driven by scientific curiosity. It was pretty much inevitable.
Okay, so picture that alternate world we've just described. A world where these proud ethno-nationalist empires of Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary are still around. A world that never experienced the shock and horror of World War I. If a crisis erupted in the 1940s or 50s, would these powers, now armed with nuclear weapons, have shown any restraint? Or would they have just stumbled right into a nuclear holocaust?
So we're left with this really unsettling final question. A world without World War I might have avoided the trenches, sure, but it might have been a world of persistent colonialism, slower social progress, and unchecked nationalism. Could a world like that, one that never learned the devastating lesson of the primordial catastrophe, have truly survived the dawn of the atomic age? That is a chilling thought to end on.